Welcome to Marmore Perspectives. Today we have Amar Raghu, CEO of Marmore Mina Intelligence, to discuss about one of his very interesting research topics titled Capital Allocation, Mother of All Metrics. Raghu, firstly, I would like to ask you about how you thought about this topic. The title is very interesting, Capital Allocation, Mother of All Metrics. Can you please tell us what made you write this research?
Thank you, Shankar, for having me here. And some years back, I read a book titled Outsiders, which chronicled the story of some 6 CEOs and how they created huge value through efficient capital allocation. That's when it really opened up my eyes that wealth creation is more about efficient capital allocation than the obsession with EPS and PE ratios that stock markets are engaged with. So, rightly so that I titled it as Mother of All Metrics just to emphasize how important it is. From a analysis point of view, how do you really differentiate a great company from a good company? It's easy to spot a good company, but it's not easy to spot a great company. And if there is one tool that you should use to spot a great company, it's to carefully see how they allocate capital. So that's probably the genesis of my interest in this topic.
Thank you, Raghu. That's very interesting. Just wanted to understand from you, if I look at it from a perspective of being an analyst, how do I go about understanding this topic of capital allocation?
Yeah, you should start basically from the sources and uses of capital, which they teach you in the corporate finance module. So a company probably generates cash through their internal operations most of the time. And where they don't generate too much cash through internal operations, then they resort to borrowings. But these are the two main ways in which the money comes into the company. And most of the time, the CEOs and the CFOs are, busy trying to generate this cash flow because they're always focused on the operational side of the business. But then when you look at the sources and uses of funds, capital allocation is all about the use rather than the source. So when you have the money that you generate, okay, how do you want to use that money? So there are some ways to do that. Most of the time, money is reinvested back into the business. I call this as reinvestment. And then if there are better options than reinvestment through mergers and acquisitions, they use that money to indulge in M&A. If they don't do both of this, then they seriously think about giving back the money to shareholders, either in the form of dividends or in the form of buybacks, or repaying the debt. So this is generally how the concept of capital allocation works. The puzzling part here is the reinvestment. Okay, now when should a company reinvest back in their business? When they make more return than their cost of capital. So it's as simple as that. So the return that they make in their business is normally measured through a metric called ROIC, return on invested capital. And the cost is measured by WACC, weighted average cost of capital. So if ROIC is greater than WACC, then you are better off investing the money that you generate from your business back into your business. I call this as the ROIC WACC spread. And in some businesses, these spreads can be normal, 50 bips to 100 bips. But in other businesses, it can be very juicy, more than 500 bips. So when you have a very juicy spread and you invest that money back into your business, then you create enormous shareholder wealth. If you have a juicy spread, but you decide to give it back as dividend, that's a bad idea. If you have a negative spread and you decide to give back the money as dividends, that's a brilliant idea, because you know that when you have a negative spread and you put that money back into your business, it's value deleting, not value adding. So you are better off giving back to the shareholders. So we have to see how CEOs behave when it comes to capital allocation decisions. Sometimes CEOs are normally obsessed with M&A, and studies show that 75% of M&As fail because M&As are difficult to integrate operationally, business-wise, culture-wise, employee-wise. So it's not very easy to pull off an M&A. And also there is always this risk of overpaying. And the risk of overpaying, I've observed, is also very true when it comes to buybacks. So we take all these legs of capital allocation and we measure the efficiency with which those legs operate. And together, when all the legs work very well, that's when you find great companies.
Very insightful, and this explains why you have titled the topic as Mother of All Metrics. You mentioned about good companies and great companies. I'm sure you've looked at some examples in your research. Can you please shed some light on them?
Definitely. And our research gives a lot of examples, but uh, we have given a nice list of companies. I would like to take, for example, Apple versus Amazon. Okay. Apple, both of these companies are very aggressive when it comes to reinvestments, which ticks the biggest box for us. But for some reason, Apple is very aggressive on buybacks, whereas Amazon is not that aggressive when it comes to dividends or buybacks. So these are two different models. They align when it comes to reinvestments, but they depart when it comes to dividends and buybacks. Also, if you look at Samsung versus Tencent, for example, Samsung is very low in M&A, whereas Tencent is very high in M&A. Reliance is very high in M&A. So different companies exhibit a different behavior when it comes to capital allocation. But what we need to see is how they come together in terms of working as a whole. That is what will differentiate a great company from a good company. But one thing is very sure, great companies almost always ticks the reinvestment box. Sometimes they tick the M&A box, many times they don't do. As an analyst, if they don't tick the M&A box, I'm very happy because I know that 75% of the time it fails. Buybacks and dividends, you can be marginally present there, but not be very aggressive if you enjoy already a good spread. But if you don't enjoy a good spread, it's a great idea to give back the money to the owners so that they can deploy it wherever they would. So these are some of the examples, but in our research, we have handled more examples.
Thank you very much for the insightful thoughts that you've shared, Raghu.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.